Good morning, students. This is Dr. Kasturi from Wales. Today we are going to see the subject software engineering. Let us get into the subject. Today we are going to see block 2. In block 2, we are going to see the unit 8, that is requirements validation. In the previous units, we saw about how to gather the requirements from the client and the customer. And then we saw about the requirements elicitation techniques. That is, different types of techniques are available to gather the information. And then we produce the SRS, software requirement specification document. Now, in this unit, we are going to see how to validate the software requirement specification document, that is validating SRS is very important so that we can create a clear product what the customer or the client needs without any reworking of work. Okay, let us get into the topic. What is the main objective? Is today's objective is that for this unit is need for validation. What is the need for validation? And what are the techniques available for validating the requirements? Yes, during the requirements validation process, different types of checks are carried out on the requirements. We are going to see one by one. What is requirements validation? Yeah, it is a process of checking that requirements, what should it contain? It should define the system that the customer really wants. Actual goal of the software development is what? It should satisfy the customer needs. Therefore, the requirement validation should check whether the requirements gathered in the SRS is actually defines what the customer really wants. And it always overlaps with elicitation and analysis. That is requirement elicitations and requirements analysis, because it is concerned with finding problems with requirements. What is the main purpose of requirement validation? To find the problem with requirements. If there's any problem, we should overcome that problem, so that we do validation process in the requirements gathered. What are the requirements gathered? We should validate that. Okay. First is to define the system that the customer really wants, and then the second point is to find any problems that exist in the requirements. And third is that requirement validation is critically important. Why? Because errors in the requirement document can lead to extensive rework cost. When it will occur? When these problems are discovered during the development or after the system is in service. During the development side, it will be a rework for them. Therefore, it will be a rework and extensive cost also applicable. Therefore, to avoid those, we should do requirement validation. It's also important. And what are the checks we should do against requirements validation? What are the things to check for the requirements? Yes, we should check whether the requirement is practically implementable. Yes, the customer or the client may give the requirement which cannot be implemented. That is, impractical requirements can be given by the customer. But in this requirement validation process, those requirements should be checked whether it can be implemented practically. This practical feasibility is there, we should check. And then if they are correct, if the requirements are correct and as per the functionality and specificity of the software. Yeah, if it is going to be correct, it is going to be work that requirements can be implemented properly, that functionality can be done properly using a particular software. It should be considered about that also. If there are any ambiguities, yes, any conflicts, any doubts is there in the requirements, you should check it. The each and every requirement should be unique, clear, and should have one interpretation. Therefore, there should not be any ambiguities in the requirements. Okay. And also the requirement should be full, it should be complete, it should not be half. It should be a full requirement. And they should be describable. Yes, they can able to describe. Requirement is able to describe. For this other thing, that is, they can be practically implementable. They should be practically implementable. And then if they are correct as per the functionality and specifically of the software, yes, according to the software, it is correct or not. And then we are going to check whether it is without any ambiguities. Yeah. and they should be full. The requirement should be full or complete, and the requirement should be able to describe. The cost of fixing a requirements problem by making the system change is usually much greater. Yes, actually, the cost of fixing a requirements problem is high than repairing design or coding errors. See how important the requirement validation is. The cost of fixing the problem. How we when we fix the problem? During the requirement validation process only we can fix the requirement problem. Therefore, this cost is higher than redesigning or coding errors. Therefore, there is more importance is there for the requirements validation process. A change to the requirements usually means that the system design and the implementation must also be changed. Yes, yeah, requirement is changed due to some errors in the requirement. What happens? Not only the requirement is changed, what happens? The system design and the implementation should also be changed. Yeah. Then that is furthermore, the system must be retested as a whole. You should retest it. Therefore, the cost of the requirements problem, fixing a requirement problem is higher than repairing design or coding errors. It is more higher. And then same way, if you are going to change any error requirement, what happens? Not only the requirement is changed in SRS, therefore the system design and the implementation must also be changed. Furthermore, the system should be retested. Yeah. Then, what are the validation checks available to check the requirement validation? Okay. During the requirement validation process, there are different types of checks to be carried out to validate the requirements present in the SRS document. What is SRS? Software requirement specification. In SRS, we will be checking different types of checking process will be there for validating the requirements. And we are going to see one by one. Okay, what are the first one is validity check. Yes, what is this validity check? This check is made that the requirements reflect the real needs of the system user. We are checking whether the requirements are really satisfying the real needs of the system users. Yes, whenever any circumstances changes, the user requirements may have changed since they were originally listed. Therefore, always the requirements are checked against the needs of the system users. Sometimes the system circumstances may change. The user circumstances may change. Therefore, it should be checked periodically. Consistency check. Yeah. Therefore, the requirements in the document should not conflict with one another. That is, there should not be a contradictory constraints or different descriptions of the same system function. Suppose we have a system function to do some work, but in different places, we should not have a different specification for that. Therefore, there should not be a different contradictory constraints. Contradictory constraints, conditions should be same for a particular description. Okay, for a particular requirement, we should not have a contradictory constraints or different description of the same system function. Therefore, the system function is functionality of the system is going to be same only. Therefore, it should not have a contradictory or a different description of a requirement. Okay, and the next one is completeness check. When what is complete is all the functions and the constraints should be whatever available should be documented in the requirement specification. The requirements document should include requirements that define all the functions and constraints, all the functions and the conditions as intended by the system user. Should not leave any piece of function. We should define all the functions, whatever functions and the constraint needed by the user. Okay. Therefore, validity checks reflects the it is used to check what the requirements is reflecting the real needs of the user. And consistency means what? There should not be, the requirement should not have any contradictory conflicts, constraints, or different descriptions for a same system function. Should not be different. for same system function. And completeness, the requirement specification should be defined with all the functions and the constraints available or intended by the system user. We should not leave anything. We should define all the functions and the constraints specified by the user. Okay. Then realism check. Yes. Ultimately, what is the realism here? By using knowledge of existing technology, the requirement should be checked to ensure that they be implemented with the proposed budget. Yeah. The budget is a very important thing which plays a major role. The cost of the software. Okay. If a proposed budget is enough to implement the proposed software, that is a realism check. Therefore, the requirement should be checked to ensure that that can be implemented with the proposed budget. If it is not going to be implemented within the proposed budget, it really mere waste for the development team. Otherwise, the customer or client is giving a budget more than the actual amount. It is a mere waste for them. Therefore, it should be ensured that they can be implemented within the proposed budget for the system. And then also take the account of the budget and schedule for the system. Not only the budget, also the schedule. Therefore, realism check means they will check against the budget and the time duration for the project development and then budget for the project development. They will check against them. These are the two checks done in realism. The main two part of a project development is only very main two. Actually, typical role played by two items are what? Budget and the cost and the time duration. Therefore, they are checked in realism checks. Okay. Then verifiability is what we verify here to reduce the dispute between the customer and the contractor. Yeah, system requirement should always be returned so that they are verifiable. Yes, who is a customer or client? Okay, who approach for a development team, the software company for a software project. Therefore, there should be no dispute because everything should be returned so that they can be checked. The software requirement should always be written. There should not be an oral commitment or oral contract. Everything should be written in SRS so that it will be verified at the end of the product. This means that we should be able to write a set of tests. Yes, how it is verifiable, how the requirements is verifiable. Yes, it can be done by writing a set of test cases that can demonstrate that the delivered system meets each specified requirement. Set of tests can be done. Demonstrator set of tests can be demonstrated so that the delivered system meets each specified requirement. Therefore, the verifiability means what? Yes, the requirement system requirement should be verifiable, should be written so that it can be verifiable. To avoid the dispute between the customer, client side and the contractor development side. Okay. Now it can be verified by using the writing a set of test cases and demonstrate the delivered system so that we can demonstrate that the delivered system meets all the specified requirements. Okay. And what are the requirements validation techniques? A number of requirements validation techniques can be used individually in conjunction with one another. Yes, requirements review. Okay, there will be a team of reviewers will be there to analyze the requirements systematically. And what the team of reviewers do, they will check for errors and inconsistencies. If there is any errors or inconsistency, they will be rectified before moving on to the next phase. The review, there will be number of reviews, and it is a systematic way of analyzing the requirements by team of reviewers who check for errors and for inconsistencies. After the errors and inconsistencies have been discovered, they will be rectified and move on to the next phase of the development. Okay. Then comes another method for requirement validation technique is what? Prototyping. Yeah. What is prototyping? A pre-model of a original project or original software. Yes. Therefore, we can create a small model, a pre-model of a executable model of a system so that we can get feedback from the end user and customer so that we can check whether their needs and their requirements and expectation are fulfilled. Yeah, therefore, what is prototyping? This involves developing an executable model of a system, and using with this, the end users and the customer can be give a feedback so that we can check whether the system, the executable model meets the needs and the expectation of the customer and the end users. So that if they give any negative feedback also, the developer can take that into account and then they can rework on the requirements process. Stakeholders, who are the stakeholders who are involved in the project? That is the technical team and the end user client. Everybody comes under the stakeholders. Stakeholders experiment with the system, yeah, and feedback requirement changes to the developer. Yes, whatever done, what's the purpose of this prototyping? To give the feedback about the requirements. There is any change in requirement, they will give the feedback, okay, by seeing the executable model. After that, those feedback recommend changes will be given to the development team for the further proceeding of the project development. Okay, so they will change the requirements and then they will work according to that. Okay, and then next comes the test case generation. Okay, what is test case generation? How to check the requirements? Requirements can be are testable. For many test cases can be written to check the requirements. Okay, requirements should be testable. The test for the requirements are devised as a part of the validation process. This often reveals requirements problem. Okay, what is that? If a test is difficult or impossible to design, what is the meaning? Actually, if the test is difficult or impossible to design, what it means that the requirements will be difficult to implement and should be reconsidered. Therefore, if a test is difficult or impossible to design, means the requirement is very complex. Therefore, we can divide the requirements into simple requirements, or else we can make some alternate requirements for that. Therefore, in this test case generation, we can find whether the requirement will be difficult or easy to implement, or the requirement is possible practically to implement. Therefore, we use test case. Okay, therefore, test is if by using the test case, we can check whether the test is difficult or impossible to design. If it is impossible to design, we can reconsider for the requirement change. Yeah. Therefore, this usually means the requirements will be difficult to implement and should be reconsidered. Okay. The next one is developing tests from the user requirements. Yes, we are not only we are checking whether the requirements can be done or it is impossible to implement by using the test cases. The next thing also we are going to check whether the requirement is satisfying the user needs. Therefore, the test is also applied for that. This is done before any code is written for the part of test-driven development. Okay, and next comes the automated consistency analysis. What is this automated consistency analysis? By this, we can use any automated tools to detect the errors and consistency in the requirements in SRS. Okay, this approach is used for automatic detection of an error, such as missing cases. Yes, some test cases may be missed, a typing error, and a non-determinism in requirement specification. Okay, first the requirement is structured in formal notation. And yes, requirement should be actually when they are gathered from the lines and the customer, it will be in informal only. It will be in a natural language. After collecting the requirement from the client or the customer, it should be converted to the structured format. Okay, therefore it should be structured in the formal notation, and then these requirements can be applied to the case tool. What is case tool? Okay, what is case tool? Computer aided software engineering tools are available. Therefore, by using those tools, you can check for the inconsistency of the requirements can be checked. It was done automatically. Okay. Therefore, the report of all the inconsistencies, what is that? The report of all the inconsistencies is identified and corrective actions can be taken. Therefore, to avoid the rework, cost, rework, and time also. Therefore, we can take this report of all inconsistencies and corrective actions can be taken based upon these inconsistencies. Okay. And then as all This unit is detailed about the need for validation and the techniques available for the validation, and what are the requirements validation process, and what are the different types of checks or validated on the requirements, the requirement document, everything have been discussed in this unit. And to the possible questions that can be asked, that is explain requirement validation, what are the various validation checks available, list out various validation techniques. Okay, thank you. Have a nice day.